once this mechanism is built, once this model exists that recursive resolvers have to submit to various demands to block sites with which we don't even have a relationship, then the gates open and the internet becomes a splinternet, and this is a big problem. It erodes trust. It erodes really the reason for the internet existing in the first place.
Now, if you haven't heard of Quad9, they're a free nonprofit DNS service. I've talked about them a few times on this channel. I think it's a great service and I've always recommended it. It's absolutely easy to use because you don't have to sign up. You don't have to give them any information. You can simply put 9.9.9 into your DNS settings and start enjoying Quad9. But there's always challenges that come with running a global nonprofit DNS service, and Sony has created some extra challenges for them lately. They've won previous lawsuits that I've talked about in Germany, but now there's a few more and some bigger battles coming, and it matters to me, and it probably matters to a lot of you, because this can fundamentally change how the internet works, and interfering with DNS and lawyers is just a terrible idea. But in this interview, we break down how Quad9 works, what their mission is, and what some of the challenges are that come with running a global DNS service. So join us and let's get started. So welcome, John Todd. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, let's for those that haven't seen this before, we've done a couple interviews and talked about Quad9, but give us a brief overview of what is Quad9.
Sure. Quad9 is, well, I'll start at the boring political layer. Quad9 is a nonprofit. We're based in Switzerland. We're a small organization, really less than 10 people full-time, but a lot of people part-time. What we do is recursive DNS. And so, meaning that we replace the recursive resolver configurations that you might have for your ISP or your company or your school or your mobile provider. We provide you an alternative to use, conveniently named Quad9 or 9.9.9.9.
Easy to remember.
And there are a bunch of other addresses as well that are secondary, but that's the easy one to remember. And we replace that so that every time your computer, your device, your IoT widget does a DNS lookup, it's actually doing it to our systems. And the benefit for using us versus what you were using previously is that we have an extremely large and well-updated list of malicious domains that we prevent you from going to. So essentially adding a security layer into the DNS by disallowing your device. It can't even connect to the malware site. It can't even connect to the phishing site. So that's the reason that most people are interested in our service, is because of the protection, and that's free, by the way. The protection they get with our malicious domain model. The second thing we do is actually something we don't do, and that is we don't collect information.
Right.
So we don't create profiles and end users. There's actually no sign up for Quad9.
Right.
We don't want your email address. We don't want to have anything. We don't want to know about you. So we are providing high levels of privacy with this type of service as well. So security and privacy. Again, this is entirely free. There's no charge. There's no sign up. So we offer this as a public service to try to make the internet a safer and more trusted experience for everyone.
Yeah, and I've frequently featured Quad9 in my list of DNS testing because there's several paid companies that claim to block things, and Quad9 is held neck and neck right on top, even with ones I've paid for the service. And the paid ones, of course, they need some type of information to collect money from me, so they do create profiles on me, even if they don't claim they sell it. That is the current administration of those. The fact that they have the ability to collect the data, we all know how that goes. We're not collecting data. Oh, this VC firm just bought us. I think they figured out a way to monetize all that data we said we wouldn't sell. But Quad9's, the fact that you don't have a way to create a login, I think that's an important aspect. But at the same time, you're not just some free, okay service. You're actually, any of my testing, and many other people have tested this, you're right up there at the top for making these block lists. And that is one thing you do collect, is a lot of data on threats. So there are statistics being gathered. It's just, they don't need to know about you and your lookups. Right. They are doing the threat management, so to speak, and a lot of that data.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people ask us, well, okay, you don't charge your end users. How do you stay in business? Like, what's the angle? The angle is, well, there are two angles. Number one is that we actually get a lot of sponsorships and grants from organizations that do want to see us do good. They do understand what we do to provide trust and safety to, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of, well, soon hundreds of millions. We only have about 100. We're guessing we're a little bit north of 100 million users now, maybe 120. Hard to say. We don't track our users, but
Yeah.
so they believe in what we're doing, and so we have people like the Craig Newmark Philanthropies has given us some money last year. We get some grants from places like the EU and OTF in the United States, but that's actually only a portion of the way that we stay in business. The other things we do is that this threat model that we have, we collect information from about 30 or 35, I'm sure that I'll be corrected in my notes here, about 35 different threat intelligence providers give us these domains. And what we do is that we, of course, distribute those out so that end users are being protected. But then every time someone tries to go to one of those, we actually do send a message back to the threat intelligence provider containing some really lightweight data, like what time that event occurred, the country from which the client was located, the FQDN, the fully qualified domain name, and also a rough geography, like a metro area level geography. And if you want to read more about that, it's in our privacy policy about how exactly we do that, which is really tedious, but
You're
it's
very transparent.
yeah. Yeah, we really pride ourselves on that. So the threat intelligence providers do actually get something from us. They get back some really interesting insights about those domains. They then, in turn, package that information up and go on and sell it to their end users. So many of those threat intelligence providers actually do give us some sponsorship. So we do get some funds, as an example, from IBM, which is one of our bigger sponsors. But others are now interested in how they can create that kind of relationship with Quad9 for that aggregated statistical information that we have. Again, nothing on end users, but we have some really, really interesting insights at a very global level about what's going on in the DNS. And there are threat hunters and there are organizations who are trying to make the internet a better place, researchers that find that interesting, that data very interesting. And so some of them are willing to pay us for it. Again, not about the end user, but it's about aggregated information. And as long as it meets our mission, as far as making the internet a better place, we're happy to exchange that in some way for funds to keep us, keep the lights on, keep equipment shipping, and keep people paid.
Yeah, and it's just an interesting business model because everyone's looking for an angle. There's not anything not transparent about how you do this.
Mhm.
And to top it off, that is some really interesting data to go. All of a sudden, this weird domain that you got blocked is being group
Yeah.
looked up. So there must be some type of malvertising campaign or something causing that. And that's what the threat researchers are looking for. Like, cool, we have some ideas now of that campaign
Yep.
being more active, and they know a little bit more statistics on. So that's interesting. But let's get on to some other things going on at Quad9 because
Sure.
we
There's always
we
interesting
survived
things
the
going on.
Sony one. I'll leave a link to that video. Now
Yeah.
what?
So as I said, I think in our previous conversations, really the recursive DNS is one of the last places people can get their hands around the throat of the internet. And I use this phrase over and over, right? The HTTPS and encryption of various protocols has made various abilities for organizations to block content. It's made it very difficult for them. Well, okay, you keep moving sort of down the stack, and the next to last place is the DNS. If you can see what people are trying to look up, and if you can force a blocking event, meaning if you can force a name to suddenly disappear, you can create conditions where that site cannot be reached. And so we do this in cooperation with the end user. If they wish us to, we'll block malicious sites. And by the way, we also have an unblocked feed, so you can choose to use a blocked.
Or unblock it.
9999 is a feed that contains this malware block, but we also have 99910, which has no blocking. So that's the end user's choice. But we typically find that end users don't want to go to malware sites or phishing sites, so they
Yeah.
usually use the for choice, the malware version. But in Germany, as an example, Sony Entertainment tried to make us block a website that they claim contained copyrighted information. So we were not acting in cooperation with the end user. That was actually us being forced to do something by government request. Now, the same thing is happening in France. And by the way, the case in Germany went on for like 2 years and through 3 appeals, and we did win that.
Yeah.
It took a long time and a lot of fighting, and frankly, a lot of money that we should have been spending on the network. We spent on legal resources and time, staff time, and it
It's
burns
a
your
pain.
life, right?
No one wants to go to court. It's a pain, and it takes away
No.
from your mission. It takes away
Yeah.
from what you're actually trying to do.
Especially considering we're a not-for-profit that's trying to help security. Having this kind of shoved down our throat is like the wrong direction. You're making people say, all right, I'm not as interested in Quad9 because you have to do these blocking events that are not in my best interest or they're not in my desired interest. So Yeah, it's a problem for us. So we won in Germany. Now we're moving to France, and so the fight continues. We also have one going on in Italy as well. So there are multiple fronts opening up where governments and at the moment its rights holders are trying to block certain sites, but we will probably quickly see that expand and that becoming not just rights holders, but it's going to become we don't like this political party, and we're going to demand that this gets blocked. And
Right.
that once this mechanism is built, once this model exists that recursive resolvers have to submit to various demands to block sites with which we don't even have a relationship, then the gates open and the internet becomes a splinternet, and this is a big problem. It erodes trust. It erodes really the reason for the internet existing in the first place.
And a lot of the reason for any of the audience scratching their head going, why would they go after a Quad9, a nonprofit? Well, it's because they're not as
That's
well
why.
funded as something like a Google, because Google has better lawyers and about what do they make, like $27 billion a second or some crazy number?
Quite a bit. There's good news in this. In if there can be good news in a lawsuit, in the activity we're taking in France right now, which is with Canal Plus. There are other defendants, so it's not just
Oh,
against
good.
Quad9. So Cloudflare and Google are actually named in that. I think Cisco was named. Cisco went with the atomic option, and that they basically shut down service in France. They just pulled out. And they're like, okay, we're not doing any
Is
service in
it not
France.
my problem?
Goodbye. And so that clearly is not a benefit to French
No.
citizens, but that's what happened.
And
And
Cisco's got enough money to fight this. I mean,
well,
they chose not to.
moving into speculation land here, right?
Yeah.
Cisco, Cloudflare, and Google all have other businesses that exist in France, and they have other different sources of revenue. And Quad9, however, is one of the few that doesn't have another source of revenue. We're not selling widgets, we're not selling advertising, we're not selling CDN services, right? So um, Cisco. Again, I can't actually answer the reason for that, but it's clear
Right,
that
right, right.
Cisco has
That's
other businesses in
speculative.
France.
Yeah,
So,
you're
so by
involved legally, so we'll just
by
they
by
decided
by
to
with
drop.
yeah, by withdrawing like that, they chose a path that I can't fault them for the path they chose. Where we sort of have to fight because we don't want to leave our users stranded. We don't want to depart from France. We don't want to leave these users at a point where they're using less secure services and getting infected with malware and phishing sites. So that is our last possible path that we want to pursue. So we're going to fight in France and continue to appeal as far as we can because we want to create the concept of the recursive DNS ecosystem being a mere conduit, meaning it's a service that has no knowledge of where who the user is or where the names are being answered. So that's where all we're doing is we're taking a query and giving a response from some other service. We don't know the content. We don't want to know the content. Leave us alone, right? Because if the more you meddle with the recursive DNS, the more you, again, I keep using the word trust, you're eroding the trust in the internet, and that is a really bad idea, and that's going to have many more unintended consequences than is desirable. Even to these rights holders that think they want to do the right thing, they're actually going to be doing the wrong thing significantly and hurting themselves in the coming years.
Yeah, and ideally, they should be pursuing if someone's holding and someone's hosting your intellectual property, or you believe they are, that
Well, for
person,
them.
not the carrier, should be, because you're just a resolver going, it's over here. That's all DNS does say. This name belongs to this IP address.
Yep.
That IP address is served up from a hosting company.
Yep.
Call them.
And what's more absurd, of course, is that anybody can run their own recursive resolver.
Yeah.
There are a dozen different packages out there in the market. You just install it and run it, and now you get the answers.
Because they're not
So
asking these be taken out of the root servers. They're still available through the
yeah,
root servers. So
yeah,
you're an intermediary down, being recursive down from the root servers.
yeah.
It's just wild to me, but it's lawyers involved with DNS. That's what this is.
Again, it's sort of grasping at straws. I'm not sure is quite the right term, but right there again, because a lot of other avenues have been closed now. Like the last place you can try to go after this is recursive, and
Mhm.
that's vastly the wrong place to do it because you're breaking your the English phrase is throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Yeah.
You're destroying the system that is doing so many other things by trying to create this architecture of censorship. And so, again, we're very much opposed to that, and we'll continue to fight that, not just in France, but in Italy and any other nation that has these kind of demands that they put on us. In Europe, of course, because of the Lugano Convention, which is just what happened in Germany, we have to comply with European demands. Because it's possible for civil cases to be pursued across national boundaries into Switzerland. So even though we're a Swiss entity, we still have risk by being in Switzerland because of the Lugano Convention. So we will still. So Europe is going to be the area we're going to fight the hardest, but we are going to fight this everywhere it happens, or we have to come up with some other solution on how we're going to resolve this, because it needs to be nipped now in the bud before it becomes a wider scale thing. Otherwise, we'll start to look like countries like China, which they have a very strict and very effective censorship model using the DNS, and that's not where we want to go, I think, as a worldwide community.
Yeah, and like you said, we don't want to create a Splinternet where only part of it works. That's just, it doesn't go down the right path.
Yep. And it's interesting because we're looking at the term Splinternet is usually applied to, okay, there are certain IP address ranges you can get to, or there are certain networks you're allowed to connect to, and we're Splinternet can apply at various different layers in the stack. And if you manage and control and censor the DNS, you're effectively creating a Splinternet, because you're preventing the applications from talking to end destinations, even though you might be able to ping that host. But if you don't know what the name is, or if the name that you're trying to look for can't map to the IP address, then it's effectively removed from your view. Until you run your own recursive resolver, that is.
Yeah,
right?
then we got to start running our own, and that becomes more complicated. You don't want to do that. And if you don't use that, you wouldn't have all the threat intelligence that you guys have. So,
Yep, yeah, and you also give up privacy. There's some benefit to using Quad9 because your queries are being sort of churned into millions of other users' queries, so it's very difficult for someone to figure out who's querying what on the other side of our recursive resolver. So there's privacy issues on both sides of using Quad9. Like you have to trust us that we're not doing something with your queries. At the same time, if you run your own recursive resolver, you're emitting all of your DNS from your local IP address, usually on your home network. Now, there are some people who have hosted service providers and everything else. Your audience is going to be much more sophisticated and say, no, I can work around that. Well, yes, you can, but most of the world can't.
no.
And that's what we're trying to kind of solve the problem for the 95 or 98% of the world that doesn't have that technical sophistication.
And of course, just for clarity, anyone who's looking to hide their IP address from Quad9 just uses a VPN service, and you'll just blend into the noise, and
Sure.
because you're not tracking people by their IP at all, but that'd be one more way to obscure you from it. And it's easy enough to use it that way, as long as Sony and those in power do not try to block it all.
We actually, VPN providers are actually some of our most active endpoints. Like looking at the ASNs, aggregating, how many queries do we get from various ASNs? We get a lot of traffic from VPN providers because, again, they don't. A lot of people don't even trust their VPN provider. Like that, using the DNS resolver of your VPN provider might not be the greatest thing. So they add an additional layer of obfuscation by looking at Quad9. And we can't tell who they are. We just know that, hey, this VPN provider certainly does seem to have a lot of traffic. So great.
Yeah, perfect. So beyond legal stuff, what else is going on at Quad9?
Growth, the usual. We've been growing at around 2% per month, or sorry, per week. I wish it was per month. For a couple of years now, and that's a really scary number. It's good. That kind of growth is great. If we were a startup, people would kill for that. But we're in the condition where every new user actually costs us money. So the growth, though, is hopefully fueling some additional sponsorships. Where we've got a bunch of different grants in queue right now. We're applying for a bunch of different ways that we can continue growing forward with our staffing and with our equipment. So I'm hopeful this 2025 is going to be a growth year for us, but it's always in question, right? Grants and sponsorships are a really challenging way to grow. So we're also looking at trying to build, again, some of our partnerships a little bit more with that data that I talked about, that aggregate information about the way the internet is working. And so we'll be having the term product is the wrong way, but we have to start creating more partnerships where we say, okay, we have really insightful data at a global level. Is there organizations, are there governments, are there NGOs willing to pay us for some of this? Because that's the kind of insight that they need. We talked about how we could sell to governments the ability to understand what's going on inside their inside their borders. We can't tell you who's looking up things, but we can show you a really interesting graph that says yesterday there was a doubling in the number of blocked domains that occurred within Liechtenstein. So isn't that an interesting thing? Like that's because most governments don't actually have a good understanding of what's happening with their citizens.
Yeah, from a threat standpoint, not just what
Right.
people are looking up. That isn't what
No,
we're.
no, I don't.
That's,
No, no, I don't want to
yeah,
give them
it's
what they're looking up.
specifically the
I
threats.
want to. I want to tell them what's going on with threats. Like, what are we blocking? What is the state of security as far as our perspective for the people inside your borders? That's really interesting, because there are a lot of, and I know people put the tinfoil hat on, but there are actually a lot in most governments. There is a group who's really their goal is to help stay secure, like to help their citizens, prevent them from getting phished, prevent them from going to malware sites. Even if you look at it in the most selfish sense, they don't want employees of the government to be phished
Yeah.
by some other government, right? And so we treat all our users equally. And so I'm hopeful that we can talk to different organizations who are interested in those kind of insights and come up with some way to exchange that for the value that we're bringing. So again, trying to keep the lights on, trying to ship more machines. The number of machines we're shipping out the door now is starting to reach fever pitch. We're in more than 300 locations now, and that's increasing.
And I think let's clarify that a little bit for those that don't understand how this works. You don't just host Quad9 in a data center. You create presence
Yeah.
globally in order to give, because DNS you expect to happen fast. I want my resolution to happen fast. We don't got time for anything. We all impatient on the internet now. And so I remember how long it used to take an expire record in the 90s when I first started setting it up. I mean, everyone had long expiration times.
Yeah,
But
no one does that anymore.
yeah, so you have to physically build the boxes. You have to load the software for the
Mhm.
recursive resolver, and then you have presence where it's shared in many, many data centers, like you said, over 300 of them now,
Yeah.
across the world.
Yep. So the team here has been working really, really hard in the last couple of months to build, to create a better pipeline for getting equipment out, turned up, turned on, and we've achieved that. But now we need some money to actually start to push more systems into the pipeline. We use Anycast for this, so we announced the same address spaces in all 300 locations. So hopefully, BGP, the Border Gateway Protocol, will get your traffic to the closest location. If you're lucky. Some places it doesn't. BGP is a weird and still a fickle thing.
Yes.
And it doesn't look that way if you only have a couple locations around the world. But if you have 300, you start to see really all the creases and seams and problems with individual providers. And like we're struggling with an issue in Switzerland right now, where still a lot of Swiss traffic goes outside of Switzerland to come back in.
Yeah.
Deeper to get into than I want to, but there's a lot of really specific things that you have to solve when you get this kind of scale, and it's really fascinating stuff. But it does take quite a bit of work to get there, which is a shame because you sort of have to be this tall to ride this ride now to start up a DNS service, and that's I'm I'm of two minds, right? I'm really happy that Quad9 is doing that, but at the same time, I'm sad that it is becoming a much more difficult thing to do. This fundamental, like I could set up a DNS server and run it myself. Yeah, you can. You can do it yourself, and then once you reach a certain scale, it becomes really hard to do. It's like learning chess, becoming a master at chess. It's like
Yeah. I can
it's
figure out the moves, but actually beating someone who's really good at it
yeah,
is way
and it
harder.
and
And
it's gotten way harder in the last couple of years. There's a bunch of new technologies like encryption that have rolled out, and there's just, the edge cases keep increasing to do something the right way.
And for those not familiar, the old joke that it's always DNS until it's BGP. There's whole
Yeah.
nother, BGP problems are global outages, not minor annoyances from DNS resolvers.
Yeah.
I've actually covered a couple of them on my channel. One of the really huge ones was when Verizon screwed up a BGP route. They accepted a bad route and took down like part of the eastern seaboard. This is a number of years ago, but you make a couple of BGP entries wrong, it's really hard to undo that once they propagate. So
Yeah, and it tends to lead to cascading fails,
yes.
where suddenly the traffic just starts melting things as it moves around. And I really sympathize with those organizations. I used to work in the ISP space as well, and I know it's really touchy. And we've suffered from BGP failures, not our own, but others. Like someone allows one of our prefixes to leak, and they pretend, well, they not so far no one has intentionally done it that we've been aware of, but like they essentially say, oh, I'm the best path to Quad9, and so suddenly half of Africa is routing through Mauritius, right, to try to get to our service, and it just blows up the server there because that we don't have enough capacity to serve half of Africa at that location. So things like RPKI are really important now, and so that's becoming more of a thing where you can validate like that you're announcing or that you're accepting prefixes from the right place. We're really interested in the manners work that's being done to kind of create these norms of how internet service providers or how AS numbers really interact with each other. So that's very important, and I'm glad to see that there's been a lot of work done by that with some of our partners like GCA, but others have encouraged the adoption of RPKI manners and other things to keep BGP from being a problem. And I'm actually really encouraged over the last 2 years with the work I've seen in BGP sort of stabilizing and those issues becoming less prevalent. I think there is still room for people to intentionally do bad things with BGP, so that's a concern. But the number of mistakes, anecdotally, I've seen diminishing, and that's good news.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned. Like even the Verizon one, I right away. That has been years since Verizon did that, and
Yeah.
it's not as bad as it used to be. I've got a few friends that work at that, and I've learned a lot from them, kind of because they work managing that, and it's really interesting. Because Arbor Networks is based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. They got absorbed by another big company. That was one of their specialties, is managing it. So I learned a lot about BGP, and also scratched my head a lot about BGP at the scale. It's like everyone's like, well, Tom, that's the stuff you use to, do some basic routing and set some VPNs up and manage the IPs. I'm like, at scale of the internet,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
I feel like it's pushed beyond where someone thought it would be, which has caused all kinds of, it's based too much on trust is probably the easiest way to say it. Like you said, someone can publish a route improperly and it affects you, and you're like, no, my routes are properly, my stuff is.
Yeah. Yeah, it is trust. You have to trust whoever it is you're talking to, and then downstream n number of times. Like you have to trust that they're doing the right thing. And so the trick is to be able to create people's demands so that they're demanding that they're upstream. Like, who do I trust to get my packets back out? That you have a demand that says, okay, you as my provider, I have certain requirements for you that you're going to do these things. And so that's really how it has to go. And lastly, BGP is really just a question of how traffic is routed. And there's the question of outages where BGP can cause outages. But then there's the more delicate and difficult problem where BGP is intentionally flawed to create traffic going different paths so that it can be intercepted or observed even. And that is where there are different solutions, and that's where things like DNS encryption come in, and just protocol encryptions in general with strong trust at the application layer need to be done, and that's a whole other ball of wax. But no matter where you should always assume your traffic is being intercepted or observed. So even if it's only so encrypt everything is our opinion. So we're really pleased to see again more. Actually, that's another Quad9 specific thing. We're seeing an increase slowly in adoption of encryption in clients. So that's good. But it's still the vast majority of the traffic is still UDP unencrypted. So
Most things are just not encrypted. It's people with their Linksys routers or WRT 54G just will not die.
Well, interestingly, a lot of the stuff now is coming with encryption built in. The home routers are starting to come with encryption
The
built
home
in.
routers on. Okay.
So Quad9 as an example in the ASUS that where we're a pull down option in there, and there's a bunch of
nice.
others where now you get DOH or DOT built into the device that it does forwarding through an encrypted channel. So that's really encouraging, and I'm hopefully I don't know what the status of the software stack model is. I know that as soon as software is available that's easy to use, that a hardware manufacturer can just pull off GitHub and jam into their equipment, then they'll do that. But if it's difficult to do, then you don't see new protocols appearing. But until there's some really good like lightweight and I'm sorry, I actually lightweight protocol stack that gets encrypted or gets encryption into these end devices, that's where we'll see it really start to pick up, especially when the Chinese devices are using a standardized stack that everyone agrees on.
I feel like OpenWRT is going to become a lot more popular in that area because it's got such a broad support for things. It's becoming a more popular project. And I believe it's got all the DNSSEC built
Yeah.
right in. I don't use it, but I've been poking around looking at it going, okay, this looks like a neat little open source project out there for people that just want to not have you. It's kind of that I want something better than the generic stuff I can buy at a big box store, but get a little bit of control of the firmware. And OpenWRT, they seem like that might be a solution for that.
I hope so. There, there are a growing number of people just putting DNS servers and other things on little, Raspberry Pis and things like that. Like there's
Oh yeah,
Pi-hole
Pi-hole.
and Technetium, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly because I've never actually heard someone pronounce it. It's another DNS server, but it will run on Windows as well as a bunch of other things. So Technetium is actually kind of interesting. So there are a growing number of forwarders that can also be recursive resolvers, but forwarders that we're seeing at the edge where people are basically running their own little cache that they're pointing at our systems. And that works really great too. In fact, we encourage that. If you have a cache, things get faster for you and you still get the privacy while also getting the control and the ability to observe your own DNS queries and everything else. So
Yeah, so Pi-hole and then putting Quad9 there, you get all the threat protection from Quad9, and then you can do your own customizations with Pi-hole to customize the other feeds.
Yep, ad
that
blocking and
yeah,
whatever else you want to do that we don't right now.
yeah, because you're not dealing with the tracking side. You don't make any judgment on it. You're focused on threats. If there's someone that wants to put trackers, that's not your, advertising's advertising.
Well, that's an interesting debate internally, right? Like when does tracking become malicious? And that's that gray area. We have to keep moving the bars. All right. Well, there are some ad networks or tracking networks which are malicious, and we do block them. Or I should say more specifically, our threat intelligence providers have made the decision that they are actually malicious, and we relay the information, and we don't exempt those because any threat intelligence provider can give us a list, and we can actually say, no, you know what, we're not going to accept this from you. We're gonna filter that out when you give it to us. But so far, we haven't had to do that. Excuse me, on any of the what we call malware ad tracking kind of things. We haven't had to do that. So there are some trackers we block, but we have not chosen to do that to ad networks in general.
But there are specific malvertising campaigns, and that's completely understandable.
Yep. And again, using the judgment of our threat intelligence providers who know way better than us about what's bad and what's not, we accept the feed from them and we distribute it. But we've told them that advertising in general is not part of our acceptable set. Should we do that in the future or not? I don't know. Stay tuned. There are good arguments on both sides, quite frankly, and that's going to have to be a debate we have with our privacy council.
Yeah, it's interesting because really I was digging into like what were the top threats of 2024, having some discussions, and it's phishing and malvertising are really on the top of the list. Malvertising for the consumer side, but it's actually how a lot of businesses were, especially the small businesses, are getting tore up. The craziest ones I've seen. Someone was just looking for a form, and one of our clients, they were looking for like a generic form for in a transportation industry. What would be a common form to fill out for not a bill of lading, but like a truck checklist or something like that. There was a PDF.exe from from the top link, which was an advertisement, because we were able to monitor it. Our system stopped it, but it made me really wonder, like, wow, that was interesting. This ad was perfect. So I went and typed in the same query they had for the search. I'm like, yeah, that brought the same ad up, and it's being served up, and it's PDF.exe, and it's it wants to install something.
And then the question is, what's the site that's hosting it, right? Is it a specific? Is it a named site that like looks that only hosts that, or are they distributing it through are they putting on a Google Share or on an AWS share or something like that? Because we can pick certain names. We can find that there are certain names. If all they're doing is malware, we can block them. But if it's a generic name, then it becomes a lot tougher because we can't block the 99% of the good content for the 1% of the bad because people will leave the service. So there's a delicate balance there about what do you do in mixed environments. So it's always challenging.
I believe it was S3 bucket it was pulling it from, which I can't block S3. I can't block Amazon. That's just not, it's not a tenable solution. I can block that specific fully qualified URL of that bucket, but that doesn't solve the greater problem of there's another bucket somewhere with something in it.
There's always another bucket.
Always another bucket. Well, how can people help Quad9?
Sure. That's an easy one. So there's two ways. One is to use us, right? We do benefit from having end users utilize the service, so that's great. We're in especially larger universities, schools, hospitals, anywhere where there's a community of risk. We have specific feeds for hospitals even. So we're very interested in bringing on new users onto the system because that growth helps us talk to grant sponsors. The continued growth means continued funds. The second thing is that we do accept individual donations, and we
Yeah.
really appreciate that, especially in the times we're fighting lawsuits, because it doesn't just say that we're getting money. We appreciate the money, that's great, but what it does is it says that there are people who believe in what we're doing, and saying that, okay, I support Quad9 because of your defense of the DNS, because of your defense of the open internet. We're really interested in seeing that kind of support, even if it's only a few euros, dollars, francs, whatever you have. So go to the Quad9 website. There's a link upper right, I think, that says donate. If you pull down one of the menus, we'll always welcome whatever you can afford. We think the value is pretty high for what we provide, and we're always looking for larger scale sponsors as well, because that's always, again, sponsorships and grants are always. For any of you who have done grants and sponsorships, we spend almost as much time trying to find the grant as we do actually getting money from it. So we're looking for larger donors, corporate sponsors, who can help us, again, keep the internet an open and safe place, because that's really all we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I encouraged people before, and I think a lot of other security people. And it was a nice way to say, "Hey, would you like to say screw you to Sony? Throw money at Quad9."
Well,
That's me saying it, not you. You have legal things that you cannot comment on that, I'm sure.
So I'll back up. So I sympathize with rights holders, right? Because
Yeah.
we understand that artists, especially, they need to have income from their
Yes,
work.
absolutely.
And we understand that in these particular point cases that might seem like this is the right thing to do, but it isn't in the long run. And the threat that it raises is much more significant than the problems that it solves. In fact, we argue that it solves no problems whatsoever. Anybody who's looking for that content is just going to run right around us, and go to some other resolver or build their own resolver or come up with some other way. So it's a meaningless gesture that damages the internet. It damages ultimately their artists and their rights holders' ability to get revenue. Don't do it. Stop it. Like, leave the DNS alone. Find some other way to pursue these particular problems. Pursue the problem at its source, not at 2 or 3 layers away, which is where we are.
Right. And there's a lot you can spend time reading of some of these large companies behaving the way they do, less for the artists. My heart goes out to the artists who have ever had to deal with copyright infringement. I've dealt with it myself. I'm all for supporting the artists. I don't feel that that's what some of these large corporate entities are really doing. They're supporting themselves more so.
Well,
And they're, like you said, they're not doing, this is not the right way to do this anyways.
the lawyers always get paid.
Oh yeah. Lawyers always win.
So in a lot of cases, this is, well, this is my opinion. In a lot of cases, these lawsuits / these pursuits are because it needs to appear like there's activity being done to protect the client. And honestly, it's not protecting the client. It's not protecting the rights holder, but it's creating a lot of heat and smoke for no ultimate purpose, and it could potentially harm the global internet. So it's a really bad idea. But the lawyers always get paid as kind of that.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes.
Thank you for the update on Quad9.
Happy to give it.
Before we go into a circle on.
Yeah. No, it's mostly good news.
It's mostly good news. Mostly good news, a little bad news.
Stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant, and leave some comments down below, folks. I think there's some more things you may want to know about Quad9. We'd love hearing from you. And I think me and John are going to do a video coming up on some of how they manage all that data and statistics. We'll get that video out coming up soon. There's a lot more intricacies of some of the functional challenges, and I think that's going to be a fun conversation we'll have again. So stay tuned for that.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Take care.